right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders, all sorts of stuff that we can be worried about and afraid of. My goal is to help you learn a little bit more about OCD, about anxiety, the anxiety cycle, all of that, and ultimately how to get your life back is the goal. So welcome to the show. I hope everyone is out there taking care of themselves. If you are new to the show, this is a question and answer based podcast where you can ask questions about anxiety and treatment and treatment tools and things like that. And I will answer those questions. This episode, however, is not going to be a question podcast. I was lucky enough to have a guest on this episode, and I'll do an introduction to her soon, and then we'll jump into that interview. But I just wanted to say that I hope everybody out there is taking care of themselves, is doing well. I think that it's safe to say that we are in a very, very weird time. I know that if everybody is out there, or if anyone out there, I would say, is worried, nervous, scared, it's understandable. It's, to a certain degree, I would say it's reasonable. As we all know, as we've been talking about on this show for a very long time, anxiety is just supercharged when we don't have a lot of information. And right now we're in a situation where we all don't have a lot of information. We have good information. We do have some. We do have some guidance, but it seems like they are coming out with new information every day. And when we're stuck in a situation like that, it can feel untethered. It can feel disconnected. It can feel frightening because our brain then likes to fill in the blanks with the worst case scenario. And I think, as I mentioned, maybe in the last episode, is that, I'm not alone, or you're not alone in that. And I'm not immune to it myself. Every person I'm talking to, even anxiety specialists out there, we're all very aware of it. In fact, this week, I'm going to be shifting all of my practice to online only to reduce contact between clients and also to reduce contact with myself. As I mentioned before, I have a chronic a respiratory issue, and you know what? It could impact me. And I get those intrusive thoughts too and those worries, but you know what? I'm doing what I can, and I'm acknowledging that I have those thoughts. I'm acknowledging the position and the reality of life. But you know what? I'm also reflecting instead on the fear, but instead onto what I can actively do. And what I can actively do is follow the CDC guidelines. I can follow the World Health Organization guidelines of washing my hands, practicing the social distancing which is a term that we never used up until about a week ago. And now it's a term that we're never going to forget. I'm also ultimately trying to take care of my mental and emotional health, which means I'm trying not to listen to too much of the news. I'm trying to eat healthy. I'm trying to exercise as best I possibly can. Some of the best things that we can do as a preventative measure is to take care of ourselves in general. And those are those things that we've been talking about for thousands of years, for a very long time. And it's sleep well, drink water, eat right, reduce smoking, reduce alcohol use. And you know what? Now is the time, everybody, to engage in comfort activities. You've all heard of comfort foods? They have comfort activities. Some of those things are going to be watching dumb movies. They're going to be listening to music that we, are guilty pleasure things. It's going to be that sort of stuff that we just enjoy, and it's the fun stuff in life. Because right now we're going to be surrounded by scary stuff. So now to that point, in this episode, I tried to edit as best I possibly could, but you know what? I recorded this episode with Kelley Franke, my guest, and this was recorded about a week and a half ago. Now, it seems that a week and a half ago, we kind of lived in a different world, and Kelley and I have a relationship and a friendship where we have, and a sense of humor, where we enjoy dark humor. And from time to time during the episode, we made a couple of coronavirus jokes. I edited out some of the dumber ones, but I think one or two might have slipped in. And it's not because we are trying to be insensitive. It's certainly not because we don't care about people who are in this position, because we are also in it, and we have loved ones who we also want to stay healthy and safe. But it's that we as people sometimes use humor as a release valve for our anxiety and fear. I know I do. I have found humor to be one of the most important things in my life to dealing with some of the hardest things in life, some of the harder things that I've ever had to deal with. I've approached with humor. It doesn't mean I'm funny. It doesn't mean that some of the jokes are good, because they're probably not. But they make me laugh, and they release some of that tension. I think that's the magic of humor, and that's one of the best things that we as people have. I also think that is a skill and a tool that you out there can apply to your anxiety. If we can learn to laugh at the thoughts that we have, and perhaps not take the fears that we have, our anxieties, our insecurities so seriously, then we can actually get through it a little bit easier. We actually get a little bit more of a handle on it. Now, of course, that's a skill. Of course, I don't expect everyone to just all of a sudden be good at that. And I think some people out there, I'm hearing you already, you're saying, but these are serious things. My anxieties are serious, and my feelings are serious, and they are. They are serious, and they're real. But you know what? We also can attempt to take a perspective on it where we can find some humor in it. So it's not to say that this episode is just chock full of, COVID-18 or COVID-19 jokes, because it's not. But it's to say that if some fall through, and if some people are offended by them, it's never our intention to hurt anybody's feelings, but it is our way of processing and dealing with this. And I'd encourage you, if I could offer anybody some homework, some guidance, and some encouragement for this time, it's to try to find some humor and try to laugh during this time. And that may be getting on Netflix and watching stand-up. It may be watching funny movies. It may just be telling dad jokes. Man, I'll tell you, I downloaded an app a couple weeks ago, and it sends me a dad joke of the day, and they're great in that they're terrible, but they're great. So stuff like that, if you can find something this week, please do it. It will make this time go so much faster, and you'll be so much happier in the process. So, all right, so that is my mini sermon of the day. All right, so about my guest: compassionate, thoughtful, and skillful. If any three words could describe anybody, they describe my guest, Kelley Franke. A graduate of Pepperdine University, Kelley is an OCD specialist with the OCD Center of Los Angeles and has a unique interest in postpartum and perinatal OCD. With OCDLA, she works with adults, teens, and children across the anxiety spectrum and is the author of OCDLA's very popular subscription series, Reflections on Skin Picking and Hair Pulling. In addition to having a full caseload, she is active on Instagram, giving guidance and valuable information about OCD and anxiety treatment. I'm honored to have her join me for this episode, and I feel lucky to call her both a colleague and a friend. So, without further ado, Kelley Franke.
We're recording right now.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
We've been recording for 3 minutes now.
Oh, you sneaky guy.
Yeah.
Just like you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what do we want to talk about?
So, today we're going to be talking about postpartum and perinatal OCD.
Yay, my favorite.
I know, which is exactly why I have you on. So, I have you on, as I mentioned, because you are a fantastic therapist. You're going to turn red. I know you're going to turn red. You're a fantastic therapist. You know your stuff. So what I wanted to do today is just have you talk about the topic that you're most excited about, most interested in. So, so we're going to talk about. There it goes.
Sorry.
I'm going to stop pointing it out. I swear.
Yeah, please.
I'll tell you, because though you might be anxious, I'm actually really anxious too.
I think it's because it's contagious.
No, I'm not even concerned about the health thing. If I die, that's fine. It's talking to someone, and all of this, because it's being recorded, counts.
I know. It's
like
a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure. Like, this is for score.
Yeah, we're on.
We're on.
Can't redo.
No, you can't redo. mean, I suppose I can edit, but I may or may not edit this out.
That takes too much work.
Way too much work.
No.
So, all right.
Okay, stay focused.
All right, focused.
Kevin. Come
I can
on.
do this. This is the problem. This is the problem. When I record by myself, I can just kind of look into nothing and get bored and go on Reddit, or I have to actually focus up and do things. All right. So, Kelley Franke.
We're probably going to get distracted a lot. Just had to say that. So keep us on track, please.
You're right. You're right. I'm guiding the ship. I can do this.
You got it.
I'm a professional host. I can't even say that with a straight face. All right. So, Kelley Franke.
Yes. Kevin Foss. By the way, KF.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, I'm done. Sorry.
Both.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. It's very confusing. All right. Tell me about postpartum OCD.
Postpartum OCD is, let's say, like an excessive worry that you will harm your child or you will be somehow responsible for harming your child, either accidentally or intentionally. Is that good?
It sounds great.
Okay.
I mean,
sounds like a good time, right?
It sounds like a horrific time. So how does postpartum differ from perinatal OCD?
Perinatal would be while the baby is still in the uterus. Is that appropriate?
In the uterus? Yeah, it sounds great.
In utero.
In utero, yes. Okay.
And this can happen to dads too, not just moms.
Ooh.
And grandparents.
Ooh. All right. So we're going to get into that a little bit later.
Sorry.
No.
I'm excited.
Oh, you're getting excited. You're getting ahead of yourself.
I know.
I like it. Okay. So give us an overview of, first off, what OCD is, because this is a subject that not a lot of people are talking about. It's not one of those.
True.
It's not one of the excessively common subtypes of OCD. It's not one that I don't think there are a lot of articles talking about it. Probably for a lot of reasons. One, it just simply might not be as common. But two, I'm willing to bet there's a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of misconceptions about what these diagnoses are, and also, I bet there's a lot of underreporting.
Agreed. I think that's the main issue because, so do you want me to define OCD first?
Ooh, let's do that.
Okay, so OCD is unwanted, intrusive, distressing, repetitive thoughts, feelings, emotions, thoughts. Did I ever say thoughts?
You
I did.
say thoughts, feelings, images, sensations, and urges.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And the compulsions that are done to neutralize those things. Those can be mental compulsions, physical compulsions, reassurance. Am I missing something?
No, all of that sounds great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that applies now to perinatal postpartum.
Right. So yeah, so I'm kind of, as we're talking about that, as previous listeners have heard, it's this big giant cycle. It's this, we're going to have these weird, stupid thoughts that occur as that what if or if then sort of concern. That is those unwanted thoughts, feelings, images, sensations, and urges that usually lead into that anxiety, because we don't really want to feel anxious, or we don't really want to have that thought, or we don't want the possibility of that thought to happen. So we try to do something, which is those compulsions you were talking about, to try to get rid of that dumb feeling, that dumb thought, or that threatening feeling, or that threatening thought.
And then negative reinforcement occurs.
Right.
Which perpetuates the cycle, unfortunately.
Right, because once we do that compulsion, we go, okay, I'm safe. Everything's going to be okay. I'm safe. I'm not a monster because of the thing that I did and the reassurance that I got. So, whew. But then inevitably that thought shows up again.
Correct.
Ugh. OCD's stupid.
See, now you're an official OCD therapist.
Finally. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I've been doing this for a long time.
I know. You trained me, actually.
And I've been looking for some validation.
Okay, there it is.
Damn it.
It's the last one you're going to get too, buddy.
That's fine. I've been doing this for a very long time, and this is the first time someone's ever actually given me the thumbs up. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a stamp or anything, but
damn it.
It's verbal.
We should get a stamp.
We should.
Should get a stamp.
Okay, stay focused. Kevin.
Focused. All right. So we talked about the differences between the two. Can you talk about some of the common obsessions that someone might have between postpartum OCD or perinatal OCD? Actually, here's a better question. Is it important to differentiate between these two? Because the OCD community, we love to have these different subtypes, different titles. In this case, is it that important, or are we just kind of unnecessarily splitting hairs?
I think we're splitting hairs a bit, actually.
Okay.
I think this is about uncertainty.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's the answer you wanted to hear.
That sounds good.
Let's have you explain the question further. Let me explain further. Sorry.
Okay, so I'll ask you a little bit better.
Yeah, because you're asking it quite long.
This is my problem.
I lost you at the second part.
That's totally fine. So with when it comes to postpartum OCD, you kind of talked about how that is going to be focusing on the time after the child is born.
Right.
Perinatal is going to be before the child is born. But is there going to be a tremendous difference between making sure that we have the appropriate title to perinatal or postnatal? And is it worth fighting about or worth discussing the differences in treatment between the two?
So does treatment look different between the two?
That's a much better way to have asked that.
Okay. Oh, you're welcome. No, I don't think treatment is going to look any different. I think perhaps the better question, maybe how does treatment differ from other forms of OCD?
Okay.
What do you think? Is that a good one?
That sounds great.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, why don't you answer that question? So
I think let's actually go back to where you said like the prevalence.
Okay.
Because I think that'll tie nicely in here. I think that there's a lot of underreporting going on, and this is why. There is this sense that moms know how to be moms just naturally, right? Like, oh, it'll just come to you. You'll figure it out. If you're an anxious mom, good luck with that. It's a really scary process, and there's way more pressure because you're like, wait a second. How do you hold the baby? Am I looking at the baby right? So I think there's a lot of that. And I think there's also, when you go in for your first like wellness check with your baby, I remember getting a survey. And one of the questions that they ask, and I don't know if they did this with you and your baby, but I'm sure they did. I think it's actually like a national, what's the word? Help me.
Test?
Yeah.
Assessment?
It's like a standardized
screening.
test. It's a screening or standardized testing for postpartum depression.
Oh, okay.
And they have you fill it out. I remember the first time I saw that, and I almost ran out. I think it was like the second or third question, and they say, do you have thoughts about harming your child? Dun, dun, dun. Very scary. So a mom with OCD or a dad with OCD, they see that and they're going to shut down.
Right.
And they start worrying, oh my gosh, if I say yes on this, they're going to call CPS, which by the way, that happens, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's a question like that is incredibly frustrating because it's to a certain degree, it's asking you to lie.
Yeah.
Because the vast majority of people will have some of those thoughts. I think I read a stat somewhere that said, let me get this wrong, it's on my website somewhere, but something like 74% of people, not just the OCD community, of people will have violent thoughts towards their child.
Yeah, that probably sounds about right. If you've ever been in a room with a child screaming, good luck, because that's brutal.
Yes.
Just the heart rate goes up and you're like, I will do anything to shut this child up. And
it wears you down. You don't think you're going to have it, but it wears you down ever so slowly or ever so quickly.
And you haven't slept. You and partner are probably going at it. It's just, it's a brutal time.
Right.
But there's a lot of education now on postpartum depression. So I think that's how, the standardized tests go. And so many women do suffer with postpartum depression. I think we were looking at the stats and it was like up to 75% of women. But the OCD stuff isn't in there. Right.
I definitely want to ask later what sort of questions you think should be added to that, if there were questions to be asked to help discern between those two. But when you read that question, what'd that feel like? Did you say yes?
I didn't. I said no. And I think the part of the reason I did say no, perhaps a lot of the reason why a lot of moms say no, or dads, is because of that fear that the pediatrician's now going to call CPS. They're going to assess for harm to the child. You're scared you're going to lose the child. I've definitely had a client that happened to. It was a very sad case, and all because of misinformation. But you have to remember, when I had a baby, I specialized in OCD. It still scared me. It's tricky. OCD.
It's a tricky one.
It convinces you the thoughts are real.
Right. Oh man. Yeah. Being an anxiety therapist and having your own anxiety is frustrating. It's annoying. Let's
It
say
is.
that.
It's definitely that.
You're like, shouldn't it be above this? We're not.
No.
All right. So
No, we all go to therapy. It's fine.
oh yeah. So going back to the specific ways that POCD, PPOCD, or not POCD. That's a whole different
No,
conversation.
but we'll get into that, I'm sure.
Oh, we'll get there. But how postpartum and perinatal OCD, what are some of the common obsessions that people would have? So, when we're talking about identifying that we have these thoughts, or that these are perhaps OCD thoughts, what are some of the things or some of the common ways that these show up just as the worried thought?
Yes, great question. I approve of that one.
Thank you.
FDA approved. KF approved.
KF approved.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry, guys. We're getting a little distracted here. Kevin's funny in real life. Not on his show.
I'm awful.
Except right now. Okay, sorry. Really common, he's cueing me. Really common obsessions. Everyone's anxious, like Kevin was saying. Like, everyone gets these intrusive thoughts of like, oh my gosh, please just stop crying. I'll do anything. But the difference is, just like how in anything with OCD, is it tips the scales, right? Like, they become paralyzing. And let's just give you a few that I've heard or that I've experienced living through perinatal postpartum.
That'd be great.
Is, what if baby died? Very common thought for parents, new parents especially.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's no doubt. OCD starts to tip the scale when you're sitting there and that's all you can think of. I remember asking my husband, poor David, asking him, will you go check the baby? Because I was convinced if I went and checked, I would find this dead baby. Like, I was convinced.
Yeah.
And then I would keep asking, and then we would I would look at the camera obsessively, right? And I'd record it. I paid extra money to get it recorded, to have it in the cloud, and then rewind and make sure, like, oh, is she moving?
Just to rewatch it.
Yeah. Or wanting just to have the baby in the same room. So that's a common one. Another one is obviously contamination. That can happen perinatal or post, right? Like, what if I hurt the baby? It could be, a lot of them can be with toxicities, like asbestos,
Lead.
lead. Oh yeah, that's definitely a big one up there.
Medication is a big concern for folks.
It is,
especially if you already have symptoms of OCD, and then it lovingly migrates into perinatal OCD. There's a huge concern about the medication that someone's taking that they were previously taking for their OCD, and now all of a sudden the worry is, well, what if that medication is going to harm the baby?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, a lot of moms that I've seen, I can't speak to everybody else, but a lot of moms I've seen, they either go off their medication or they just opt out of it because they've read all the side effects, and just everyone demonizes medication. Now, listen, I didn't take medication pregnant because of that, so I'm not impervious to these thoughts. But I think if I would have done things differently, it would have been that. I think it could have been a game changer.
Absolutely. So. What are some of the other obsessions that people have that are common for both, or that other things you've heard?
Yeah, so a lot of them might be pedophilia OCD themed, right? Like, what if I'm wiping the baby when changing diapers and I touch them inappropriately? What if I drown my baby? So a lot of moms and dads will avoid bathing. Lots of harm, obviously. Just in general, like lots of violent images of babies getting, throwing their baby across the room. Heads exploding was always mine. I know that sounds really weird, but welcome to OCD, people.
That sounds like an OCD thing.
Yeah. I was just convinced my belly would pop open if I tripped, and then heads popped. So
right.
And I was like, oh, that seems totally rational. This is OCD.
Completely reasonable. Exactly.
Yeah, but it's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. I've certainly heard folks, have that thought, well, what if I, kind of that thought action fusion, having that thought about thought about hurting the child, and the worry, well, what if I end up doing it? What if I'm going to do it if I keep thinking about these thoughts?
Yeah. And even actually one that I've seen a lot recently, is if I get mad at my baby or if I get upset, then that's an indication or a warning sign that now I've put the baby at danger. And now it's just going to be, the feeling that you just said, thought action fusion.
Yeah.
I have a thought or a feeling that's egocentronic, that it aligns, and now I'm going to kill the baby.
And so can't get mad. So don't be mad.
Try not. Yeah, please don't get mad or have a bad thought around a baby who's screaming at you, really loud, by the way, pulling at your body all day.
Who's completely irrational. The child is just irrational.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think a Buddhist monk could handle a newborn without getting angry.
Probably not.
No,
there's no amount of meditation that's going to fix that.
No. There's no way around it.
No. I mean, so to kind of go even further with some of those obsessions, there's, concern that you're going to put the, pajamas on too tight, or you're going to put them in the crib wrong, or they're going to suffocate on the sides of the crib, or there's going to be, if you're wearing them too tightly, you're hugging them too much, not enough. Are they eating enough, not enough? And basically, I mean, my understanding is anything that is related to harming that child and you being at fault, or you being tangential, or something related to the harm to the child.
Right. Or like by proxy, right? So a common one that I've seen is where the grandparents get involved, or the nanny. There's lots of rules for them. Like they can't wear flip-flops, or they have to wear certain clothing because the clothing isn't washed in this very organic laundry detergent. There's just a lot of rules around it for everyone else, and then they feel like they would be the one responsible if someone else harmed them.
Right. I mean, we're just naturally getting into the compulsions related to this. So I mean, you're
sorry. Yeah,
that's fine. I think this is a great transition.
Okay.
So transitioning into just the fact that the compulsion is going to be anything that we can do to try to alleviate our anxiety, or to try to solve the problem, to ensure that bad thing is never going to happen. So as you're saying, Nana, grandma, caretaker, they have to wear certain things, partner cannot do certain things. What are some of the other compulsions that you've noticed with these diagnoses?
Well, unfortunately, avoidance is a big one.
Yeah.
And I think that, along with the accommodation that the partner plays in terms of like reassurance, or doing the compulsions for the OCD sufferer. So to be more specific, a lot of avoidance of washing the baby, a lot of avoidance of holding the baby, breastfeeding the baby, wearing the baby. It's just really endless. The mind's so creative.
Yeah. And sometimes the compulsions don't have to explicitly match the fear itself. It's just things that we can do. That's some of the magical thinking that gets involved with it. But that's
just the avoidance stuff, right?
Yeah.
There's lots of checking that goes on, lots of washing, sterilizing areas, having the sterile field, as I would say.
And it can really overlap if you already have a contamination concern. There's definitely going to be way excessive, or much more excessive washing of bottles, of clothing, of things around the room, just to make sure there's no potential bacteria buildup.
Right. And just remember that a lot of this stuff, just to remind everyone, a lot of this stuff is common in just regular anxiety, not, a healthy amount of anxiety for parents, but it's when it becomes really excessive and paralyzing.
Right. I think the paralyzing part, that's where it kind of jumps the shark into OCD land, because it is helpful to notice, or to point out, the average person are going to have these worries. There are worries about, I remember when, our kiddo was born, there were certainly worries about, are things clean enough? I know the missus was much more concerned about cleanliness than I am, but
You're a filthy creature.
I'm a horrific man. But I mean, I even noticed in terms of, I know I'm kind of shifting into kind of the men's experience of it, but
no, please do. I think that's important.
But, I wouldn't say I have this explicitly, or I don't have this, but I remember like the third day after having the kid, it was probably like 2 a.m. Child was not sleeping. We did everything we could. You hold the baby, you bounce on the ball, you take your shirt off, skin to skin. Yes, you do. And it was just holding the baby. And I just had this thought, I should just shake her.
Yeah. I remember you came in and told me, you're like, Kelley, guess what? Yes. I just had the thought, and I was like, okay, all right, see?
And it was so weird. It was like, oh, it's so easy to have this thought. And it's not one that I sought out. It just, my brain went, all right, you've done all the things that you could do for problem solving. You've done the ball, you've tried walking around, you've done the music, you've tried playing the movie. You should just shake her.
Yeah, and so you can see easily how OCD would just grab right onto that.
Right. Because I had the thought, I had the consideration of it, I had the capacity to do it.
You probably felt frustrated.
Oh, I was frustrated.
Jess was probably frustrated.
Very.
Oh, I'm not supposed to.
Yeah, it's out.
Okay, sorry.
Yep.
Cat's out of the bag.
Cat's out of the bag. But yeah, it was a very odd thing, but it's certainly helpful. I mean, this is, I think, where the awareness comes in, and having people be aware, men, women, grandparents be aware that you're going to get these thoughts. But again, as we've talked about on this show a gazillion times, thoughts are just thoughts. They don't really mean anything specifically unless we do something about them.
Right, unless we act on them.
Right. So to kind of...
Were we talking about compulsions?
I think we were.
Okay, do you want me to go through some more?
Absolutely.
Or are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, just give you some other ones.
Yeah.
So we went through the avoidance, we went through the checking and cleaning, things like that. But I think another important one is the reassurance that comes with the partner and the accommodation. So what you see is a lot of burnout in the partner on the receiving end, because they're the ones who then pick up the slack. And so for me, when I'm treating this, that's usually the first part I go into is let's get your partner to not burn out as we're walking through this process. So let's start removing the compulsions related to them. I think that's all I would add to that.
So kind of getting them on board with knowing how the reassurances are happening, how the accommodations are happening, and have them start backing off on those.
Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, by the time they've come into my office, the partner's pretty burned out and resentful, or they're on their way. And not because they don't love them and support them, but because they've been doing this for a long time and they're exhausted. OCD does that.
And they're just burnt. They're just burnt out.
I mean, they have a newborn too.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. So I know we talked about this before, but is there anything that contributes to these diagnoses? How does someone get it? I know it's a bad way to ask it, but that's a question that a lot of folks will have is, where does this even come from?
Right. Genetics. I think it's similar to any other OCD. I mean, I think a lot of people, when they come in to see me anyways, they'll say things like, oh, but I've never had symptoms of OCD. I've never had this. Like, this is out of nowhere. But as time goes on and progresses in treatment, guess what happens? They start reflecting and they're like, wait a second. Now that I'm seeing OCD and what it is, and I understand how it works, maybe when I was in high school or when I went to college, I was obsessed with contamination or harming my roommate or, things like that. So I don't know if that answers it entirely. Genetics, obviously, there's hormones involved. There's just really not a lot of research out there, unfortunately. Like you said, there's not a lot of blogs or papers written. And I think part of that is the research. So,
yeah, and it's tough to work on this, or tough to research it if people aren't then talking about it or have a safe place to talk about that stuff. But
which is why I'm here, because we want to break the stigma.
This is exactly why we're here, yammering on this day.
Yeah, this
day of days.
Yes, fantastic day.
Yeah, but But I think that point about, the combination of genetics, hormones, and also just the environmental factors of it is that kind of the way that we respond to thoughts and the way that we treat thoughts are going to be a huge component to it. Ultimately, if we are behaviorally treating these thoughts as important, they are going to be treated as important. And that's kind of a circular way of saying it.
Right. Of course, that's the negative reinforcement. Right.
So yeah, it just kind of hits this perfect storm. And ultimately, where these thoughts come from, it's OCD is a jerk, and it's going to grab onto the thing that matters to you most. And likely speaking, if you have a child, that child is going to be important to you.
Right. Chances are pretty high.
And by the way, these thoughts can also contribute to the worry that I must not care for my child, because a mother or a father who really cared about their child wouldn't have these thoughts, right?
Well, they would, but maybe it wouldn't bother them, or they would maybe meet criteria for something entirely different, which would not be OCD.
Right. So let's talk about treatment. We've talked about what postpartum and perinatal OCD is. We've kind of talked about the obsessions and the compulsions. So what do we do with it now? Let's say someone out there has this, is experiencing some of these thoughts, knows someone who has it. How do we work with this?
Really no different than we would with any other subtype of OCD. I think it is really important to stress its uncertainty, because I think when we get caught up too much into content, it's like it becomes this identity, and it's so much more important, right? It's good to have the subtypes because we identify with it and we can speak in a very general language and understand it. But at the end of the day, what ends up happening is you start treating a symptom, and guess what? OCD jumps content. And then people go, oh my gosh, I'm freaked out, right? Like, because now it's on to something else. It's like, okay, well, we just haven't accepted uncertainty in this area.
Right. Yeah. And when it jumps from content to content, it just, the more that happens, people build up this idea that I'm just more broken, or I'm more messed up than someone else because I've had all of these subtypes.
Right.
When ultimately, as you're saying, it's all OCD. Right. I often say it's that, we're talking about POCD or HOCD or existential stuff, but really it's that anxiety cycle and accepting the uncertainty as its core focus.
Correct. Right. What was the question again? Was it, how is it different in treatment?
Just what treatment is. Now, so on the topic of uncertainty, if that's the main focus, every tool, technique, intervention that you and I are going to do in therapy is going to be aimed at helping someone to accept uncertainty. Could you just talk about what it means to accept uncertainty within PPOCD?
Sure. So it's a great question, actually. I think with the postpartum perinatal stuff, I remember my first session with my therapist, and I was, therapist at the time as well. But he said, are you willing to kill your daughter? What?
That's an uncomfortable question.
Yeah. And, I think he out of the gates did that because he knows that I know that this is OCD. But lots of times moms are very fused with that thought. So I was in a very fortunate situation. But he was very poignant in that question. Is like, because my exposures are going to be what I perceive to risking her life or psychologically damaging her. So I don't know if that helps with the uncertainty. I guess that's in general what we're accepting if it's around harm, right?
Right. Well, I mean, imagine someone listening to this is going to that question, are you willing to kill your daughter? They're going to go, no.
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
Like, no, I don't want to. That's why I'm here.
Right. Let me preface it in this manner. I like how you smiled when I said, are you willing to kill your daughter? Like, oh gosh, you're going to scare all my listeners. Like just frightened.
There's a lot of exposure that goes on just in the discussion.
I know. But bear with us. We're going to get somewhere, I promise.
So I'll put it this way. Could you clarify that?
Sure. So clarification would be, listen, this work is going to be really scary, and you are going to feel like you are putting your child at risk. Are you willing to do that? Because that's what it's going to take. You have to be committed and you got to do the work.
Yeah. So, oh man, that clarification was great. So ultimately
Thank you.
Are you willing to do something to the perception that you're going to kill them?
Correct. It's going to feel like it, right?
Right.
Because we're going to have you bathe your child when before you said you weren't going to bathe them. And the worry thought will be, well, now I'm a little closer, right?
Right.
It's just right there. Now I'm not in the other room.
Yeah. So it's that taking that one step closer towards this situation that makes you feel as if I do this, I'm going to kill them. Or if I do this, or if I don't do that, they're going to die. Or it's highly likely that they're going to befall some sort of harm, and it will be my fault.
And just like in OCD classic fashion, actually the compulsions are getting you to the place where you are harming, right? Because you're avoiding child. And that child needs you more than anything.
Right. So, I mean, in terms of treatment, there's that balance there. Because if we're talking about, to a certain degree, and we'll get into some more details about the cognitive piece and some of the mindfulness pieces as well. But where is that line? How do you find that line between what's an appropriate exposure for someone or appropriate exercise for someone to work on, exposure or not, and what's actually going to be harmful? Because if a great exposure would be just leave. You're putting that child in harm's risk, or to dunk that child underwater and hold him for like just 2 seconds.
Yeah, that's too far though, right? That's where like an imaginal exposure would come in, where you'd write a story like that. We want to do functional exposures.
Okay.
So it's like, well, if OCD wasn't around, how would you want to live your life?
Yeah.
Well, I'd want to bathe my child. Okay, let's do that. And maybe it starts with the partners in the room while they're bathing. It's very graduated typically with postpartum. I just see more thought action fusion.
Yeah.
Could be like, well, I want to change my child. I want to take them out by myself with them. I don't want to feel like I need somebody watching me. So there's that.
Yeah. I think that concept is central to all of treatment. It's if we could snap our fingers and make OCD go away, what would your life look like? What would you be doing? And it's that sort of stuff that you're talking about. I want to bathe them. I want to go out. I want to go to the park. And it's to ultimately do those things without doing compulsive behaviors.
Right. Exactly.
It's the response prevention piece that's in my mind pivotal to
Absolutely.
it. Because I think in OCD land, we talk about doing exposures and doing crazy exposures, and they sound really, quote, fun, or they sound wild and out there and dangerous.
Yeah,
and
sometimes they aren't that exciting, everybody.
They're not.
If you just remove compulsions, you're probably in good shape at that point. I mean,
yes.
We definitely need active exposures. There's no doubt.
Yeah, but as I tell everybody, if you only did one thing between exposures and response prevention, it's do the response prevention. Because life is going to give you a ton of exposures, and if you have a child,
you don't have a choice.
You've got them.
You got no control. I think that's what actually, just to add to that, I think that's what makes this also a little trickier with treatment, is that it's something outside of your body when it's postpartum. I don't know if you all have been with a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old. It's just your heart's walking out of your body, and you have no control over what they're going to put in their mouth, what they're going to touch.
I'll tell you the answer to that is everything. Everything.
So, and that gives a lot of motivation too, for parents, and just also because in vivo exposures are happening at any given moment.
Right. So now I'm blanking on where to go.
Can I add an exception to treatment?
Yes.
Or is that something that?
No, do it. Go for it. So,
and now I forgot it. I hate when that happens. Okay.
It's going to come back. Remember, I get to edit this.
Oh, I know. So there is an exception. I think like some modifications that need to be considered in this. And I think a big part of it is a lot of these parents are learning to reattach with their child and how to parent, for the very first time. So it's saying like, it's okay to kind of yell and set boundaries. That's okay. You can yell. Parents yell sometimes. Obviously it's not ideal, but it's okay. We're going to be human and imperfect. I've seen that a lot recently. That's why I bring it up, because it's again that slippery slope. Like if I have that thought or if I yell, I'm abusing them. and I don't trust myself to control myself.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's see what happens. I mean, we're trying to get these people to trust themselves again, especially as parents.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, kind of to that kind of learning theory, that's developing in popularity.
Inhibitory learning.
That's it. The worst
That's the
possible
one.
name in all therapy, because I did a whole episode on this. And it still doesn't make it, the title is useless. Anyways, what we're ultimately learning, long story short, everybody, if you haven't listened to the inhibitory learning episode, we're in a weird sense, we're relearning what's safe. We're relearning that bathing your child is safe. And I put safe in quotes. It's kind of like when we say driving is safe, flying in an airplane is safe. They are safe in that you can also die and be maimed. There is that.
Yeah, easy. It's just risky a little. You're risking a little more.
Right. But within these things, we're relearning that bathing your child is, quote, safe.
Absolutely.
Raising your voice and having these thoughts, it's still okay. It's still safe. Can bad things happen? Well, of course they can. But we're not saying, driving a car is the most dangerous thing and everyone's going to die and it's the worst.
Right.
We all implicitly recognize these risks. So in the course of doing treatment, we are relearning that these things are safe. They are. You can have these thoughts.
Relatively safe.
Relatively safe, yes. But, you can be alone with your child with a pillow next to you.
And not smother them.
Right.
And you can still have the thought. In fact, a recent exposure I did with a client is I had them do an audio recording of, it was actually for POCD, so the pedophilia themed, is, I'm going to touch my child inappropriately. So they're listening to it with their headphones while child's playing on their lap.
Yeah.
And that's terrifying.
Yeah.
But that thought would have been there anyways.
Right.
So now we're just going after it.
Right.
And then the thought just kind of gets boring. And you're like, I'd rather just be playing with my child now.
Right. It's such a hard, on the front end of treatment, it's so hard to convince someone to do this thing that at that point they feel is dangerous. Again, the anxious brain has said, this is dangerous. Don't do this. You're going to kill them. You're going to harm them.
Yeah.
So don't.
So, yeah, I know.
Do that.
And
So,
I'm saying, let's take the risk.
right. And over time, we learn that those things are safe, more or less.
More or less,
More or
right? We
less.
can't give you too much reassurance here, but
Right.
also just that we're going to make mistakes.
Yeah. Tell me about the mistakes aspect of things, because I remember you talking a while ago about just kind of accepting that even within treatment, while there are a lot of hardliners when it comes to treatment with OCD in general. We talk about washing your hands. It is 20 seconds, it's 10 seconds on the dot, no more. It's, we try to be really hard line with it, but when it comes to parenting, we have to be a little bit flexible because we have this irrational monster running around our house.
It's so true.
How do you help someone develop this kind of flexible nature with raising their child, being compassionate, and also working to do these exposures and to resist their compulsions?
Also a fantastic question, Kevin. You're really nailing it.
Thanks.
Am I talking too close to the mic?
You're doing great.
Okay, fantastic. I needed a little reassurance. I think what you're talking about is like the resiliency and the self-compassion that goes with it. A lot of modeling good behavior in session with clients and lots of validation. Like, hey, it's cool. We all do that. It's okay. And I know that OCD community, a lot of people are balking at that statement. But yeah, you're like, yeah. But with parents, I've never had it backfire on me. They get better. You know, it's like they need to know that this stuff is okay, that making mistakes and hurting your child every once in a while, they're going to fall. They're learning how to walk.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. Someone's getting hurt.
At the very beginning of treatment, reassurance is a 4-letter word in OCD land, but at the very beginning of treatment, reassurance is incredibly helpful. There's something to be said about buy-in, but also learning that, here's how this works. I recently had that example is not going to be very relevant, actually. It's going to be a client example, but it's kind of this. We will discuss the general safety of things. We will discuss how things typically work,
right?
For the cognitive the cognitive restructuring piece. So in the sake of time, let's jump into just more of the details about exposures, because in terms of the treatment arc, any good OCD anxiety therapist is going to do cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure and response prevention, and some mindfulness pieces. Now, listeners to this podcast have previously heard me yammer on about what it means to challenge the legitimacy and the veracity of your thoughts and trying to bring in some of that rational components to it. Obviously, for a lot of people, this can ultimately be reassuring. So it's a little bit of a dangerous. It's a fine line. There you go, fine line. Yeah.
It's not going to be the make or break, though.
It's not the make or break. It's more of you develop the firm grounding that you can do this, that we can do this. And then we'll get into mindfulness, which ultimately is working on practicing, accepting the reality of life without judgment in this very moment as it is.
Yeah.
And then we get into the exposure part, which is the stuff that everybody talks about, which nobody wants to do. But could you tell me a little bit more about some exposure, or how we would develop exposures, how someone who's going through this process, because the exposure piece is going to be the hardest for anybody getting into or thinking about doing treatment. What is exposure? What are exposures, and how does someone develop them?
Well, ideally, you'd want to do it with an OCD specialist, but I understand, there's not a lot of people who have access to that, whether it's financial or geographically speaking. There's a lot of really great self-help books out there, but just generally in speaking, it would be more of, let's write down all the compulsions we're engaging in and rank them from least to most scary. And you honestly, I think now the research is showing you can really pick anywhere in that hierarchy. But ideally, you don't want to, for me, I don't want to go to the 10 right out of the gates, because I don't want my client running out of the room and never coming back. I want to have buy-in, and I want them to get small wins. So they're like, oh, this stuff actually works. So usually 4 or 5 is the magic number.
On a scale of 1 to 10.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the scariest.
Yeah. I think there's a lot more research. I think you're saying that I think this is probably something they're going to talk about at the IOCDF conference, and probably something that we should have submitted on.
Probably.
Is the importance of developing a hierarchy and following through a hierarchy in terms of a really progressive approach to treatment. I think there's a lot of talk more about doing kind of graduated, meaning starting with doing an 8 into a 4 and doing a 2 and then doing a 9 and then kind of bouncing around. But You're right. Starting small is, for someone who's just getting into this, if they're doing this on their own, we walk before we can run. Yeah,
I always tell my clients, we're going to do scary things, but I'm also really humane about it.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you said, if we were to start our, the assessment session with, all right, here's a knife, there's your child, let's bring him in.
Right. That's not going to go well.
That will be our last session with them.
Right.
My example that I love is, if someone came to me to learn how to run a marathon, they're not going to talk to me about that, but, we're not going to start day 1 with a marathon. We're going to start day 1 with stretching.
Stretching, yep.
And then day 2, we're probably going to do a walk around the block. And then the next time, we're probably going to do a little jog around the block. And we're going to progressively work our way up. Now, once we are to a place of functioning or of running ability, we're going to vary. We're going to do a 6 mile and a 2 mile and a 9 mile and an easy 5. As for some reason, they say easy 5, 10s or something like that.
I've never done an easy block.
Right? God. I have marathon runner clients.
Yeah.
But they're like, oh, I did 13 miles before our session today. And there's 9 a.m. sessions.
And now I feel terrible about myself.
Right. I'm
very proud of them, but I just...
Yeah, that's really cool. You're never going to see me run a marathon. I don't like running.
Don't judge me.
Running's bad. For those of you listeners out there, I have, the little stickers on your car that say 32.9 or whatever the heck a marathon is, or 13.12, I don't know, the half marathon. I have one that says 0.0. I don't run.
This is a true story.
It's a true story. I have it. It's the only bumper sticker I have. I think it really encapsulates who I am.
I think it does.
So it's, I'm proud of you out there. If you're a marathon runner, good for you.
Getting those cortisol hormones out.
Get it. I'm going to sit.
accomplishing things.
Yeah. I went to graduate school to sit down for a living, so I am. Anyways, we were talking about treatment.
And do really weird things.
Oh, gosh, do really weird things.
Yeah, it's a great job.
I'm really qualified only to do this.
I feel like we're both kind of qualified for it.
Right. So
Sorry, distraction again.
that was my fault.
Okay.
All right, so back to exposures. So what are some ways that people can start getting into doing exposures? Let's say someone's listening to this, they're having these fears, but they don't have access to a therapist, maybe they don't have access to a good book right now. How can they start challenging these fears?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you a little anecdotal. We're running out of time, but really quickly. When I first started getting these thoughts, I was just petrified to even walk out of my front door because I thought I'd fall over the railing, and it was just not to get into detail, but I knew something was up. Something was fishy. So I called my director, Tom Corboy, give him a little plug there. And he said, Kelley, this is what you need to do. I was like, yes. Because I also didn't have the finances to pay for an OCD therapist.
Right.
And I couldn't leave the house because I was housebound from panic, but also the doctor had put me on bed rest. So anyways, he said, you need to get a paper out. He's a funny guy. And write that scary.
This is assuming that newspapers still existed.
No, not a newspaper, a paper.
A paper.
Like a piece of paper. He's like, get a piece of paper out.
Oh, I heard.
Did I say newspaper?
You said you need to get a paper route.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me pronounce my words better.
That's my fault.
He said, Kelley, this is what you need to do. Get a piece of paper out.
So much better.
Get a pen or pencil. And write that thought over and over till your hand hurts. Literally what he said. And throw that thing away. Because I told him in this email, I have this heart rate detector that I can put on my stomach to measure her heartbeats. Mm-hmm. And he said, throw that thing away. Like, get it as far away from you as possible. And I did that. And I think that helped me get a little more space from the thoughts. So that's a good graduated.
I like that, and actually really points out that one of the things that people will do as compulsion that they will sneakily say is a way for me to connect with my child or a way to, just monitor the health of the child, but really it's serving as a reassurance tool, or it can serve as a reassurance tool. Right.
And to have a little compassion here, not that you're not.
Sure.
But that they really think that's important. And that they think everyone else is bananas for not thinking it's important. So we come up with really great ways to adapt to getting it without having someone just roll their eyes and be dismissive.
Oh, and that point is incredibly important.
The dismissiveness.
Yes. And getting some buy-in, because there's going to be, with something like your child, there's so much of getting that buy-in and what a client is willing to do in this. What feels genuinely important to you, and what would you want to have in your life outside of treatment?
Values it's your North Star.
Yeah.
Hands down. Like, why are you doing this? When you're doing your hard exposures or any exposure starting out, is to remember why. Like, why you want to be more scared of doing the compulsion and the OCD than the exposure itself. It's like when you're about to go in and bathe your child and you're freaked out, you say to yourself, I'm doing this so that I can be closer to my baby.
Yeah.
It's always good to have the why.
Exactly. Is there anything else that you'd want to add about doing
graduated exposures?
Doing exposures.
I would just say there's no right or wrong way, honestly. Do you agree?
Yeah.
It's just, you're going to fail. Not fail. Sorry. Let's edit that out. You're not going to fail. You are going to feel like you're not doing it right, or that you're harming the child. And the reality is that, or that you're hurting yourself, right? Like, oh my gosh, the OCD is winning here, right? Like, I didn't do the right exposure. And The reality is you're going to go at your own pace. You're going to do the quote unquote wrong exposure. Like maybe it was too scary and you did run out of the room.
Yeah.
Freaking out. That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
Let's just go back and do it a little easier, a little more graduated.
Yeah.
It's an experiment. That's all it is.
Exactly. I tell everyone there's no such thing as a failed exposure. It's just more information.
Yeah. There's no exact formula.
Yeah. I mean, we started too high.
Yeah.
We back it down a little bit.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah. Really normal. It's easy.
Right.
No worries.
So, yeah, and I think that as we mentioned earlier, is that if we could do anything, it's between exposure and response prevention, it's do the response prevention. It's looking at taking a hard look at what you're doing and thinking about the motivation behind that activity. Are you doing this because you're genuinely wanting to connect with your child, or are you doing this because you're wanting reassurance?
Right. Am I doing this for fear?
For certainty.
Yeah.
Right. So, and then progressively backing off on that. I mean, if you could just stop doing it, you would have done it already.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about response prevention, you can talk about delaying a compulsion, limiting the time you spend on the compulsion. What else am I missing?
All those sound great.
Banning it, obviously.
Yeah, and just stopping it entirely.
Yeah.
I love the delaying. I'll do this, but I'm going to do it in 10 minutes. Oftentimes in 10 minutes, the zeitgeist has passed, the feeling has passed. So,
and in that 10 minutes, get fully involved and fully present in the moment with either a funny video or running a marathon.
Running a marathon in 10 minutes. While you have
Olympics.
An infant. Yeah.
I don't think that's possible. Superman.
They could do it. So some of my listeners could do it. Some of you out there, I believe it.
My OCD clients are the best people in the world, for sure.
Aren't they?
They are, though.
Yeah.
They're the least likely person to harm someone.
Oh, yeah. I think I've said this to my group. I would rather them hold a loaded gun than some of my friends.
I believe that.
So you talked about some exceptions to this. Could you talk about some exceptions to treatment?
Yeah, I think that the postpartum OCD is unique in the fact that you have to consider the attachment that goes on with parent-child, and that a lot of that stuff was missing, right? Like that OCD kind of robbed them of that. And so reconnecting, gosh, I have this memory that's just fantastic. I went to a client's house and I sat on the floor with her and her baby outside, and I remember her face was just terrified, and the baby was playing with me for a little bit, and then baby went to mom. It was like the most magical moment ever. Like you have a few of those, and that's definitely one of mine.
Yeah.
And mom's face like kind of, went from grimacing to kind of tightened muscles and just relaxed. And baby and mom got to reconnect. So that's really important. It's not just, sure, you could consider that exposure, of course, but I think it's double, right?
Yeah.
Like that's attachment that was missing. Yeah. And there's an emotional piece to it. And learning how to parent again and validating like this stuff's okay. This is what parenting looks like. It's messy and we're not going to be our best. You just have to be kind of good.
World's okayest.
Yeah, world's okayest.
Yeah.
It's a great slogan, by the way.
It's a great slogan.
The other exception would be the partner. Partner gets wrapped up deeply into this. And so there's a lot of interruption in being a new parent with intimacy and, dating. Dating your partner again. Yeah. And that happens in regular life. Now, if you add the layer of OCD, well, right. So reconnecting them.
So, a lot of those things are really important to consider. Having that example that you gave about, the child going to mom, the tensing, the nervousness it's the what's going to happen, but also then giving self permission to just accept that moment and reconnect. It is why you're doing this treatment. It is the reason that you care.
Yeah, it's like the calls you get or the joyful tears you get from a client when they go, I bathed my baby for the first time.
Right. Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
I hate the dismissive statement that they'll add to that. I know this sounds like such a small thing.
Oh, I know. It sounds
like such a dumb thing. It's not. It's the biggest thing.
We do celebrations in my office.
Yes.
We cheer.
Right.
And it always is like, but no, hold on. No, we're going to get really pumped right now.
Yeah.
This is one of your goals. This is the big thing.
Right. We celebrate our successes. We are really good at celebrating our failures.
Yes, absolutely. The mind it does things like that.
Right. So I think that's, I mean, if I was to add anything to, to the treatment aspect of things, is that when you have these small victories, these perceived small victories, this is the first time I put them down without checking them 50 times. I only checked them 40 times. Great.
Yeah. Amazing, actually.
Yeah.
I'm just blown away by it when it happens.
Yeah. So, and it's scary stuff. It's
very emotional, I think.
It can, absolutely. Is there anything else that you'd want to add, kind of with all this stuff that we talked about and all of our yammering and meandering? What else would you add? What would you want? What's the number one thing that's going to fix everybody here? All right, not that one.
Okay, no.
What is,
Kevin Foss.
How do you beat OCD? How do you make sure it goes away forever? Okay, that's...
that's...
okay, none of these questions.
We don't do that here.
Sorry, we don't do that here. What is, if you could...
How do I stop intrusive thoughts?
Right. How do I...
Nope.
Yeah.
That's okay. They're going to be there. Mm-hmm. Let them be there.
So what would be the advice that you would give to someone? What would be the encouragement you would give to someone who's experiencing these thoughts and these fears?
That you're not alone. And that it's okay to come forward. It's okay to take the risk that you say your scariest thought out loud, and that somebody isn't necessarily going to judge that. If you're saying it in a room full of people with OCD or an OCD therapist or specialist, there's a bug flying in my face.
I have those. Kill it.
That you will be amazed by the compassion that will actually be met there. And I think shame is potentially another thing to consider with an exception to treatment. There's a lot of guilt and shame involved in this, as there is for a lot of OCD actually, but and that's how we get rid of shame, right? That's the formula.
We talk about it.
And we're met with compassion.
Right. And we give ourselves compassion for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And some of that is having that mind shift that we can have these thoughts. And it's also in that we have to then downplay the importance of these thoughts. Not to say that all thoughts are important, that deserve our attention. Instead, they're just thoughts.
They are just thoughts. And that's also a good takeaway.
Yeah.
It's like, just because you have thoughts about your child like this doesn't mean that you're going to hurt them.
Yeah.
It's called OCD.
Yeah. Are there any books or resources or references that you could direct people to in relation to this?
That's a great question. Again, KF approved.
Well, if we find any, I will attach them to the show page.
Yeah. So I think is there like maternal.org? I think it's a UK based one.
Okay.
And then there's, hold on, it's right here. Postpartum.net, I think, is the US.
Okay.
I have to just verify that. Let's edit that out because I don't know.
Okay.
But yeah, I have lots of resources I can give you.
Okay, we'll get those, and I'll attach those just to the very end of this. I'll do some editing magic, and you listeners will hear this in just a moment. But I will also attach those to the show page for this episode.
Yes.
So Kelley Franke, can you plug your Instagram? And by the way, I probably have said this in my intro, but you should go see her Instagram page. She has a gaggle of information, very good information all along this topic, all along OCD and anxiety treatment. There's a ton of stuff in relation to postpartum and perinatal OCD as well. So what is your Instagram handle again?
My Instagram handle is Kelley Franke, Kelley Franke.
It's the EY that gets me every time.
I know.
Yeah.
I don't know why my parents said that. But it's Kelley Franke. I guess I offer the same as anyone else with the information, but maybe mine just is heavier on that. And I also am connected with a lot of people in the community that...
We're also not going to downplay how good that information is. I heard what you did. It's great information.
But I do have a lot of connections with people who I think Instagram does offer a great community for people for peer support. Like when you start reading other people, it's the anonymity of it, right? Like you don't have to fully disclose yourself. It's a good graduation of like, let's see if other people out there have this, and you will be shocked. And they are just so compassionate.
There's a warm and accepting community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I know IOCDF this year is going to be doing a lot of, I think they're doing heavy on perinatal, postpartum stuff.
And if you are going to the IOCDF, not you, Kelley, I know you're going, but if you, the listener, are going, Kelley Franke will be there. So you should go find her.
Kevin Foss.
That's what they tell me.
We'll be there together presenting, actually.
That's correct. So you should go. You should high five her. That's what you should do.
I like high fives.
Things are getting real at this point. Anyways, I think in sake of time, we'll wrap it up. I'll release you back to the wild.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Kelley.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for making it through this very, very long episode. I just wanted to add a couple of things that Kelley wanted to remind me to remind you. She also forgot to mention that one of the most difficult things that folks who are going through postpartum and perinatal OCD is that after they go through treatment, or even in the middle of treatment, there can be this sense of regret over the sense of lost time that they spent ruminating and obsessing and worrying. And it can actually be a heavy sort of topic to then have to process through. This is also an occurrence that happens with a lot of folks who are going through OCD and anxiety treatment, where they find that when they start to feel better, they can get a better grip on their thoughts and dealing with their fears. They start thinking back on all the time that they spent worrying and obsessing, doing compulsions, avoiding, and it can lead into this sense of depression and sadness. Now, that's also something to address with a therapist. And if you're kind of going through this phase, it can almost be expected that as you're going through this, there can be a sense of sadness, but it can be helpful then to reflect back onto the hard work that you put into it, onto the successes in treatment that you've had, and most importantly, on the present, on the reason why you went through all of that treatment. And it's to engage your life as you wanted it to, or as you wanted to. And that can include attempting to re-engage with your relationship with your child and trying to build that, re-engage in your relationship with your spouse and your family and your work and your friends, and trying to get back to that life that you want to be living is one way that you can help to combat that. But she wanted to mention that as one of the complications and some of the things to look out for in treatment. Now, the other, the two resources that she wanted to mention. One, and I'll add these to I'll add links to this at the fearcastpodcast.com page. And they are maternalocd.org. And that's the UK organization. And she also mentioned postpartum.net. So these are two fantastic resources that you can access if you have questions about postpartum or perinatal OCD or depression. Check out those links. Again, go to fearcastpodcast.com. And there will be a link on this episode page. So, all right, everybody, please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you have questions about treatment and or need a little bit of extra assistance and guidance in your recovery, go to fearcastpodcast.com and you can click on the Find Help link, and there'll be some things up there for you. If you have questions for a future episode, go over to fearcastpodcast.com, shoot me a link or shoot me a question there at the Ask Us a Question link or the Submit a Question link. You can also find me over at Instagram. I am Fearcast Podcast. Certainly find and follow Kelley Franke at Kelley Franke. All right, everybody. Until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye.